And who's going to think about us? Who's going to help us? Helen shouted. Charlotte even flinched at the intensity of her mother's words. She didn't recognize her. It felt like a stranger was standing next to her. But now she understood everything. Her mother had finally stopped beating around the bush and revealed her true self. Charlotte, a 28-year-old young woman, lives with her mother, Helen, her stepfather, Greg, and her younger brother, Tommy. Her parents divorced when Charlotte was 15. Her father, Robert, had left for another family. It turned out that he had been living a double life for a long time, but he hadn't planned on leaving Helen. However, once the truth came out, Helen kicked him out. Robert was heartbroken over the separation from his daughter, whom he loved dearly. He was successful in his career, and things seemed to improve even more when he moved in with the other woman. On Charlotte's 18th birthday, Robert gifted her a one-bedroom apartment. Charlotte enrolled in college and moved into the apartment. She kept in touch with her father, who supported her financially. Her mother, on the other hand, became distant. Even before Charlotte entered college, Helen had begun a new relationship. She soon remarried and gave birth to her son, Tommy. Charlotte graduated from college, and Robert helped her secure a good job. Though she wasn't very close to her mother and Greg while studying, her relationship with them grew after she started working. It all began when Charlotte helped them out financially. After receiving her first paycheck, she shared the news not only with her father, but also with her mother. Helen invited her over for tea, and they had a nice chat. Towards the end, Helen casually mentioned that they were struggling financially. Greg's paycheck was delayed. And you know how it is for me. It's always scraps. But I can't leave my job. I love it too much. Besides, at my age, where else would I go? And Greg, well, he should look for a new job, but we're waiting for the back pay they still owe him. It wouldn't be right to leave without it. And look at your brother. He needs a new jacket. His arms are sticking out of this one, poor thing. His boots are cheap too. They don't keep his feet warm, and he's been getting sick all the time. He needs proper winter gear, Helen said. Overwhelmed by a rush of good feelings, Charlotte gave her mother half of her paycheck. Here, take it. You need it more than I do. I won't spend all of this on myself anyway. Thanks to Dad, I have a great job. It's not easy to get into a place like this. Helen frowned at the mention of Robert, and Charlotte realized she had made a mistake by bringing him up. Years later, Helen was still holding a grudge against him. This is how it went. Charlotte often bought groceries, expensive medications when needed, and continued helping the family. At work, she excelled, but her workload only grew. Initially, she took on every task because it was well paid. But soon, Charlotte began to understand the meaning behind the saying, "You can't make all the money in the world," and started turning down some offers. She was exhausted and barely had time to do anything outside of work. Charlotte didn't have time to cook. In fact, she didn't have time for anything. Her mother began inviting her over after work. "You'll rest and have dinner here. I finish work early, have time to run to the store and prepare a meal. You can even stay the night and go to work from here. We have a spare room. Why keep rushing back to your apartment just to sleep?" Charlotte thought it over and agreed. She moved some of her things and started living with her mother, Greg, and little brother Tommy. She still went home on weekends. Then Charlotte started dating a charming coworker. Nick was 2 years younger than her, fun-loving, and always full of energy. He invited Charlotte to different events, out to cafes, the movies, or just for walks. Charlotte finally learned what it was to enjoy life. She started spending money on herself for her own pleasure, and she liked it. After all, she had learned how to make money, but spending it on herself was new. She had never had time to shop or go anywhere with anyone, but every month she found herself helping her family more and more, and their needs kept growing. Greg still wasn't planning to find a new job, and his paycheck was constantly delayed. Tommy needed clothes, toys, then a computer, and so much more. He was her little brother, her baby. How could she not help? Nick added bright colors to Charlotte's life, which had been weighed down by work and family obligations. She fell in love with him. She moved back to her apartment and began living with him. However, she stayed in touch with her mother, calling often, sharing her happiness and feelings. In fact, she and Nick were planning to get married. Once, Nick and Charlotte went to have tea with Helen to introduce him. After that, her mother started dropping hints and then outright said that they should postpone the wedding. She was worried about Charlotte and didn't like Nick much, saying he might not be reliable and that Charlotte could regret it. And that's exactly how it turned out. One day, a young woman called Charlotte and told her she had been expecting Nick's baby for a while now, and that Charlotte should step aside. She invited her to meet at a cafe to talk and prove her point if Charlotte didn't believe her. But Charlotte believed her. She didn't go to the cafe. Why add to her misery? She broke up with Nick, who swore up and down that he didn't know any pregnant woman. He begged Charlotte to show him her number so he could call and find out who was playing such a cruel joke on her. But in her fury, Charlotte had already deleted the entire call log, and she had no intention of forgiving Nick. She believed the caller without question because she had always doubted him, a feeling her mother had constantly encouraged. "He's younger than you, too sociable and unserious," Helen would say. "Why doesn't he always come home with you after work? Who's he spending time with?" Charlotte knew Nick had an irregular work schedule and didn't think much of it, but her mother kept planting seeds of doubt in her mind. And now all those doubts seemed to be confirmed. Nick had been deceiving her. Charlotte fell into depression. It was hard for her to be alone at home, so she moved back in with her mother. They rented out her apartment, and Helen took the rent money for herself because Charlotte couldn't care less at that point. Charlotte gave most of her paycheck to her mother, keeping only a small amount for herself. She didn't mind spending money to help her family. After a while, Charlotte started to recover. She began smiling again and showing interest in things. Her beloved work played an important role in this, keeping her busy. And Nick, having transferred to another job, was no longer in her life. That helped too, but Charlotte's personal life after the breakup with Nick was a mess. She was afraid of getting hurt again and didn't trust anyone. However, time heals all wounds, and eventually, Charlotte met the one. She really liked him. After a few months of dating, Chris confessed his love for her and proposed. And that's when all her old fears reared their heads. She was scared the past might repeat itself. After all, everything had been great with Nick too, and they had been planning to marry. And look how that ended. But there were significant differences this time. Charlotte instinctively kept Chris a secret, especially from her mother. She managed to keep her relationship hidden for a while. Chris knew she lived with her mother, but he didn't even suspect that she had her own apartment. One day, Chris suggested they move in together. "Come live with me. I have my own place. We'll live together for a couple of months, and then, if you want, we can have the wedding in the summer. Honestly, I don't want to wait a minute longer. I love you so much." Chris looked at Charlotte tenderly, but her mind was racing with terrible scenarios. Things just can't be this good, she thought, torn between her doubts and her desire to simply live and love. "I love you too, but I want to make sure we're right for each other before the wedding. And I guess it's time to tell my mother about us and introduce you to her." Helen did not take the news that her daughter was moving in with her future husband well. It hit her suddenly, and she was taken aback. She tried to come up with weak arguments for why Charlotte shouldn't move out, but Charlotte was firm in her decision. As the argument escalated, her mother, losing her composure, clenched her fists and screamed, "You can't leave us! Who's going to help us now? You'll get married, have a baby, and forget all about us. We were planning a renovation. I've already picked out summer vacation packages. We still have to pay off the car loan, and—" "Mom?" Charlotte sat down on the couch in shock. It was a good thing it was there, or she might have fallen. She suddenly realized that all these years, her mother had simply been using her. Helen also realized she had said too much in her outburst and backtracked. "Sweetheart, listen to me. I'm just worried. What if he turns out to be another jerk? Remember how hurt you were when Nick betrayed you?" But Charlotte wasn't swayed. She understood everything now. Her mind was spinning with thoughts. She began to suspect there had never been any pregnant woman at all. It was all her mother's doing, that phone call. Just as it was then, now too, Helen cared only about herself and her comfortable life. Once her daughter married, she would lose a significant financial boost. Nothing else mattered to her. Chris came that evening to help Charlotte pack. She had called and told him everything. That's how they met. Helen was silent, glaring at her daughter with hatred as Charlotte packed her things into bags. Charlotte had no desire to stay in her mother's house another minute. And with Chris's support, she demanded the keys to her apartment back, along with the details about the tenants currently living there. She was taking control of her life. When Greg came home from work, he walked in just as Charlotte and Chris were leaving with her things. He greeted them indifferently and went inside to take off his shoes. Charlotte felt as though he didn't care at all. And Tommy, who had been playing on the computer in the other room, which, by the way, had been bought with Charlotte's money, didn't even come out once to see what all the yelling between his sister and mother was about. He was turning into a selfish person, just like the rest of them. Charlotte's father, Robert, congratulated her on her upcoming wedding. They met up with Chris in a cafe. "I'm happy for you two. Will I be invited to the wedding?" Robert asked with a smile. "Of course, Dad," Charlotte replied. She was happy. "And what about your mother, the moment she sees me at the wedding?" her father started to ask. "She won't," Charlotte said. "She's declared that I've betrayed her, and she doesn't want to know me anymore. She won't come to the wedding." "You spoiled them, Charlotte. Let this be a lesson to you. Life throws all sorts of things our way, but the important thing is to learn the right lessons," Robert said. "But let's not dwell on the sad stuff. Chris, do you promise to love, protect, and take care of my daughter?" Robert asked with playful solemnity. "Of course," Chris smiled. "I'll guard her like my own soul." Charlotte looked at her father and Chris, feeling an overwhelming love for them both. She was so grateful to have them in her life. That's how the story ends, friends. Join the conversation below and express your thoughts on this novel. If you found it captivating, share the link with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new story that will make your heart race. Your support inspires us to create more tales. All the best to you. Take care and see you next time.